Hello again. One of the best things to do in autumn is to turn these into this, cider. Just like with wine and beer making, it's possible to get very much into the weeds with cider making, but I'm going to show you how it's super simple to make and incredibly satisfying to do. Nothing quite like having a glass of something you brewed yourself after a long day outside. When you're making cider, you'll want to have a nice mixture between cooking apples and eating apples. If you have too many eating apples, it's a bit thin and uninspiring and lacks body. If you have too many cooking apples, it winds up too sharp and sour. The goal is to try to achieve a nice balance between the two, and you can manage that by simply having equal quantities of these apples. Now, there are some apples known as cider apples that already have this perfect ratio of sweet and sour in them already. This is a Kingston Black, one of the cider apples. This tree was given to me a couple of years ago as a Father's Day present. That's only produced one apple this year, but it's only young. We'll be patient. To make apple cider, all you have to do is collect your apples together, chop them up, press them, add a bit of yeast, and wait. After a year or two, you'll have something fantastic to drink. Now, instead of adding yeast, you can let the natural yeast that's on the skin of the fruit do the fermenting for you. I'll talk more about that later. Now, it's here at the end of the apple season, so we're going to go and collect all the apples that are still on the trees and make some beautiful cider. I don't think this one Kingston apple is going to be quite enough. Come on, Hazy, let's go get some apples. Now, don't forget to collect in all the windfall apples. These are simply apples that have been blown off of the tree. A lot of them are in perfect condition, and if they have the odd blemish, you can just cut that part away and use the rest of the apple. We're not looking for supermarket perfection. We simply need healthy fruit we can press for its juice. Any apples that are too far gone, you can just leave here for the birds. I wanted to show you this apple. It's a very weird apple. It's called an Egremont russet. It was discovered in Egremont, Cumbria, in a farmer's field. When you bite into it, it tastes almost dry and a little bit nutty. It's very strange. It seems to have no juice at all, but actually it does. In fact, we made this single variety cider from it last year. So we're going to get in and press these apples and crack on with it. We washed 17 kilos of apples. That was what was in those trays you saw a moment ago. It should be more than enough for this press to fill this demijohn. The demijohn holds about 4.5 litres. It's an old imperial gallon. So we need to prepare these for our scratter. A scratter is an interesting piece of kit that turns apples into pulp. Now, sadly, ours isn't good enough to deal with whole apples, so we need to chop them into quarters first. Now, when you do this, it doesn't matter if you leave the pith in and the seeds and the stem. It can all go in the cider. It doesn't make a difference to the flavour. So just remove any bad bits where somebody else has had a nibble of the apple before we got to it. They can just go in there. And the rest of the apples go into this bucket, which forms part of our scratter. So if you enjoyed that, I've got several hundred more to do. This is a scratter which will take our apple pieces and turn them into pulp, like I said a moment ago. It consists of a plastic bucket, a lid, and this implement that whizzes around at high speed when you're connected to your drill. Now, it seems like it should be a fairly fast process with mechanical power and whizzy bit, but actually it takes quite a long time. And every year we think, oh, should we upgrade and get a better quality scratter? And then we think, no, it won't take that long. Surely this will be a quick process, but it's not. By halfway through the orchard full of apples, we begin to think again very seriously about upgrading. So maybe we'll do that next year. Anyway, we'll crack on with these apples, and it's quite noisy and takes a bit of time, so I'll get back to you. So after you've been scratching for a while, you'll see the apples have all become mostly little pieces, and it's much less full than it was. So at this point, it's quite helpful to pour more apples in. Eventually what you'll get is a slurry of chunks of apple and juice inside of here. Now you'll see this apple is beginning to go brown. That's going to happen more and more as we go through the process, but it has no impact on the flavor at all. Right, well that's this bucket all scratched. You can see it becomes this sort of puree, slurry if you like. Now sometimes you get chunks that just don't get chopped. I think it's because when it gets so soft and liquidy like this, the blade is unable to apply enough pressure to chop it, but you just take them out, add them to the next batch, it's no problem. Right, time to get pressing. I really enjoy this bit, and I really like this traditional looking press. So let's get it loaded up. This is the last batch of apple pulp to go in. You can see the juice is already beginning to flow. This is just gravity pulling the juice down through the pulp. We haven't started pressing it yet at all. All right, the next step with this press is to place these 2 half moons of wood on top of the apple. the next step is to add these spacers. The reason you do this is because when you tighten the pressing plate down with this gizmo here, it will crash into the top of the press, which is no good. So you need to raise the height that you're going to be pressing on a bit higher with the use of these spacers. The press came with a couple, but we also cut some additional ones so we can press smaller amounts of juice when we want to. You then put this pressure plate on top. There's a washer that goes like so. And you screw this onto the threaded rod that runs to the bottom of the press and is bolted on the underside. So, there we go. You can see we've already got half a demijohn full of juice, and I've not applied any pressure yet. The fruit is up to about here, so let's see what happens when we start applying some pressure. It's flowing very well now. It is very dark, like I said, because of oxidation. It doesn't impact the flavor at all, and it's quite cloudy. It does become more clear as it brews. If you want it to be very clear, you can use pectolase, which breaks down the pectin in the apple juice, but let's see what it tastes like. That is really good. That is essence of apple, very sweet, very appley. That's going to taste fantastic. I think we're going to just have to save some of this to drink straight. It reminds me of the cider I had as a kid, non-alcoholic cider. I grew up in America, and there the word cider means unprocessed, unfiltered, raw apple juice. This. And it tastes just the same. I didn't know that alcoholic cider was a thing until I came to Britain. Discovery I'm glad I made. All right, this demijohn is full now. You need to leave some space at the top for the foam to appear while it's brewing. So we'll swap these demijohns over. Right, you may notice that the juice coming out now is much lighter in color than the first batch. That juice was the juice that was in with the pulp and has become much more oxidized because it was exposed to the air for longer. But one interesting phenomenon is it's also much, much sweeter, which means that that demijohn will be more alcoholic than this demijohn and have a different flavor because of it. Now, if you wanted to avoid that, you could just put this juice straight into a bucket, give it a stir, and then decant it into your demijohns. You'd get a consistent flavored cider that way. But I quite like the variety of having them taste different. At this stage, you have a choice to make. Do you go with natural yeast or not? Now, in the past, we've done it with natural yeast, and if you get it right, it tastes fantastic. But we've also got it wrong. Well, we didn't. We got the wrong kind of microbe in here, and it turned this into apple cider vinegar, which is fairly soul destroying. After all the work you go to, you want to have something beautiful to drink. So what I do these days is use Camden tablets, and what they do is they suppress the other microbes that are in here to allow these that you want to take over and colonize, and then it becomes the cider you're after. Camden tablets, the main ingredient in here is sodium metabisulfate, sometimes potassium metabisulfate, and there are other ingredients in here as well that help to ensure a good brew. The idea is you take one of these tablets out per gallon, so they're conveniently pre-measured, and just crush them between 2 spoons, which can take a bit of effort. But when you get it down to a powder, ignore that bit I just dropped. When you get it down to a powder, you then sprinkle it into your brew and give it a stir. But I'm not going to do with that spoon. Then give it a stir. Distribute the Camden tablet and fit an airlock to keep your brew safe. Right, then you need to wait 24 hours before you put your yeast in. We tend to use a champagne yeast, which we think gives a really nice flavor. After a long day in the orchard, I think I've earned this. We'll soon have demijohns of cider bubbling along in the kitchen. It's a beautiful sound. I think I'll go inside and have a think about a new scratter. Cheers.